everyone. The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe is a very famous novel by C.S. Lewis. Have you read it? It is one of the novels among the 7 in the Chronicles of Narnia. If you haven't read it, I'm sure you have heard of it. The land of Narnia is ruled by the White Witch. There are animals that talk, and a lot of mythical creatures. There is a magic wardrobe that leads to this fantastic land. So today I will read and explain an extract from the story. In this extract, Edmund is on his way to visit the White Witch. Let's see what his journey is like. Please listen to the story very carefully and try to remember all the facts, because I have some questions for you at the end of the lesson. And those questions will help you to decide whether you know the story well or not, and whether you should read it again. Okay? So who exactly was this White Witch? And why was Edmund trying his best to get in touch with her? Let's find out soon. Stick with me and we'll go through this entire lesson. In the Witch's House by C.S. Lewis. And this is an extract from The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. Edmund had eaten his share of the dinner, but he hadn't really enjoyed it, because he was thinking all the time about Turkish delight. And he had not enjoyed the conversation much either, because he kept thinking that the others were taking no notice of him and trying to give him the cold shoulder. What does this mean? Edmund, as you can see in the picture, sitting right there at the head of the table, he had eaten his share of dinner, but he didn't enjoy the dinner, because he was thinking of Turkish delight, which is a sweet, the dessert that would come later. And he had not enjoyed the conversation much either. They were all talking. You can see Mr. Beaver and Mrs. Beaver in the picture, and Edmund's siblings, his brother and sisters. And they were all talking about something. And Edmund just did not like to listen to what they were talking to. Why? Because he felt that they were giving him the cold shoulder. What does that mean? Giving someone the cold shoulder means ignoring that person, not paying any attention to him, not listening to him, not talking to him. And Edmund felt that they were doing that to him because they were all engrossed in conversation and they had not included him in it. Or maybe he had not included himself in the conversation and he just imagined that they were giving him the cold shoulder, which actually was the case. They weren't, but he imagined it. And then he had listened until Mr. Beaver told them about Aslan the lion, and until he had heard the whole arrangement for meeting Aslan at the stone table. It was then that he began very quietly to edge himself under the curtain which hung over the door. Just as Mr. Beaver was repeating the rhyme about Adam's flesh and Adam's bone, Edmund very quietly turned the door handle. And just before Mr. Beaver had started telling them that the White Witch wasn't really human at all, but half a djinn and half a giantess, Edmund got outside into the snow and cautiously closed the door behind him. So none of them was actually giving him the cold shoulder. He had imagined it. And he heard about Mr. Beaver telling them about the lion whose name was Aslan, and he heard the whole arrangement about meeting Aslan at the stone table, and he was fed up. So he began to edge himself to go slowly under the curtain which hung over the door, the main door, the entrance. And the last thing he heard was Mr. Beaver repeating a poem about Adam's flesh and Adam's bone. By then, Edmund had quietly turned the handle of the door, and he did not hear what Mr. Beaver said next. He should have heard that, because that would have made a difference. But he didn't. What was Mr. Beaver telling the others? He told them that the White Witch was not human. She was half a jinn. You can see the meaning of jinn below. An intelligent spirit that can appear as a human or animal and possess humans. And she was half a giantess too, a female giant. But Edmund did not hear that part, which was very important. Edmund had reached outside. He was in the snow, and he had already closed the door behind him very carefully. Now, Edmund wasn't quite so bad that he actually wanted his brother and sisters to be turned to stone. No, he did want Turkish delight and to be a prince and later a king, and to pay Peter out for calling him a beast. As for what the witch would do with the others, he didn't want her to be particularly nice to them. Certainly not to put them on the same level as himself. But he managed to believe that she wouldn't do anything very bad to them. Because, he said to himself, all these people who say nasty things about her are her enemies, and probably half of it isn't true. She was jolly nice to me anyway, much nicer than they are. I expect she is the rightful queen, really. Anyway, she'll be better than that awful Aslan. So, Edmund was not a bad person, but like all of us, we all have this anger towards our brothers and sisters because they tease us and they irritate us so much. So he wanted to teach his siblings a lesson as well. But he didn't want anything very bad to happen to them. He had heard that the White Witch turned people into stone, but he did not believe that. He wanted the witch to treat them badly and to treat him better than them because he was very angry with them. He was angry with Peter because Peter called him a beast. But that's what siblings always do, isn't it? And he did not really believe what everyone had said about the White Witch. He thought she was a nice person because she gave him Turkish delight to eat, and that was his favorite. He looked forward to it. And she was always nice to him. She had never been mean to him. So he believed that she was actually very nice, and all the people who said bad things about her were probably her enemies. That's why they said bad things. He believed that she was probably the rightful queen. And anyway, he believed that she would be much better than Aslan, who was the lion, and he had heard so many bad things about it. At least that was the excuse that he had made up in his mind. The first thing he realized when he got outside and found the snow falling all around him was that he had left his coat behind in the beaver's house, and there was no chance of going back to get it now. The next thing he realized was that the daylight was almost gone, for it had been nearly 3 o'clock when they sat down to dinner, and the winter days were short. He had to make the best of it, so he turned up his collar and shuffled across the top of the dam to the far side of the river. So what's the excuse he made up in his mind? He made up the excuse that the White Witch was not really a bad person, and people who said bad things about her were actually her enemies. That's why they said the bad things. She was actually a very nice person. Why? Because she had treated him well, And she had offered him Turkish delight, which was his favorite. Secondly, the other excuse he made up in his mind was that his siblings had been mean to him and they needed to be treated badly. Not very badly, not to the extent that they had to be turned into stone, but he wanted them to suffer a bit for being mean to him. And he was hoping that the White Witch would do that and treat him better. And then he was also hoping that he would someday become prince and then a king. So that was the excuse he made up in his mind. Now, when he went outside and he found the snow all around him, he realized that he was feeling cold and he had left his coat behind. But he could not go back into the beaver's house to get it because he had sneaked out from there. They did not know he had left. And there was no chance of getting it. So he had to just make do with what he had. So he pulled up his collar higher and he just managed the cold. Also, it was turning dark, and if he wanted to get to where the White Witch was, he had to move quickly. It had been 3 o'clock by the time they had sat down to have their dinner at Mr. and Mrs. Beaver's house. So now it was much later than that, and it was winter to add to it. Winter has shorter days, daylight is much less. So he had to move really fast. So he shuffled across the top of the dam to the far side of the river. Dam. A dam had to be there because Mr. and Mrs. Beaver lived there, and beavers love making dams. Let's continue. He would never have found his way if the moon hadn't come out by the time he got to the other river, a smaller river flowing into the great one lower down. He now reached this and turned to follow it up. At last he came to a part where it was more level and the valley opened out. And there, on the other side of the river, quite close to him, in the middle of a little plain between two hills, he saw what must be the White Witch's house. And the moon was shining brighter than ever. The house was really a small castle. It seemed to be all towers, little towers with long pointed spires on them, sharp as needles. They looked like huge dunce's caps or sorcerer's caps. So the only reason Edmund found his way to where the White Witch was because the moon came out. He had a little bit of light because it had already turned dark. It was winter and he would have had no way to see which way he was walking. But because of the moon, he found his way. He got to the other river, which was a smaller river, which flowed into a greater one lower down. And then when he reached the part that was more level and the valley opened out, he saw on the other side of the river, there was a plain between the two hills, and he saw the White Witch's house. By now, the moon was shining very brightly, and he noticed that the White Witch's house was a small castle. It was beautiful. It seemed to be made up of towers all over, little towers with long pointed spires, which are structures like cones on them, and they looked sharp as needles. They looked like huge dunce's caps or sorcerer's caps. So let me explain the meaning of dunce's caps. Like I've written below, it's a paper cone worn by a stupid student at school. Now, this is not done anymore. It used to be done in earlier times. When a teacher found that a student was giving a stupid answer, the teacher would make the student wear a paper cone. That was a dunce's cap, a fool's cap, so to say. Sad, isn't it? And they shone in the moonlight, and their long shadows looked strange on the snow. Imagine white snow and the moon shining its light on the snow and the shadows there of the spires. Edmund began to be afraid of the house, but it was too late to think of turning back now. He crossed the river on the ice and walked up to the house. There was nothing stirring, nothing moving, not the slightest sound anywhere. Even his own feet made no noise on the deep, newly fallen snow. He walked on and on, past corner after corner of the house, and past turret after turret to find the door. He had to go right round to the far side before he found it. It was a huge arch, but the great iron gate stood wide open. Edmund crept up to the arch and looked inside into the courtyard, and there he saw a sight that nearly made his heart stop beating. Just inside the gate, with the moonlight shining on it, stood an enormous lion, crouched as if it was ready to spring. And Edmund stood in the shadow of the arch, afraid to go on and afraid to go back, with his knees knocking together. He stood there so long that his teeth would have been chattering with cold, even if they had not been chattering with fear. So Edmund wanted to turn back because he was really afraid now after he had seen the White Witch's house. But there was no way of going back, it was too late. So he crossed the river on the ice and walked up to the house. Now there was nothing moving, no sound, no movement. Even his own feet did not make a noise when he walked on the snow. Usually there's a crunchy sound when someone walks on snow. There was no sound. And he walked on and on. He walked on and on past corner after corner of the house, and past turret after turret. That's a small tower over a bigger tower. And then he had to go to the right far side before he found it. It was a huge arch, but the great iron gate stood wide open. So Edmund crept up to the arch and looked inside into the courtyard. And what did he see? He saw something that made his heart stop beating. It was something that scared him so much. Inside the gate, with the moonlight shining on it, there was a huge lion, and it was crouched. That means it was sitting in a position as if it was ready to attack him. And Edmund stood in the shadow of the arch. He was afraid to move on. He was afraid to go back. His knees were knocking together. He stood there so long that his teeth would have been chattering with cold, even if they had not been chattering with fear. So his knees were knocking and his teeth were chattering with cold and fear. He began to wonder why the lion was standing so still, for it hadn't moved 1 inch since he first set eyes on it. Edmund now ventured a little nearer. He now saw from the way the lion was standing that it couldn't have been looking at him at all. In fact, it was staring at something else, namely a little dwarf who stood with his back to it about 4 feet away. Aha, thought Edmund, when it springs at the dwarf, then will be my chance to escape. So Edmund was wondering why the lion was so still. It had not moved at all since he first saw it. So he began to walk a little closer to the lion. And then when he came a little closer, he noticed that the lion was standing in a way that it wasn't really looking at him at all. In fact, the lion seemed to be staring at something else. It seemed to be staring at a dwarf, a person who was very short, who stood with his back to it about 4 feet away. And now Edmund had a new plan. Initially, he had found it difficult to escape from the lion. He was frozen with fear. But now he thought, as soon as the lion springs towards the dwarf and goes to attack the dwarf, then I shall make my way out of this place. I shall get a chance to escape as soon as that happens. But still the lion never moved, nor did the dwarf. Edmund kept waiting for the lion to start attacking the dwarf, But the lion never moved, nor did the dwarf move. And now, at last, Edmund remembered what the others had said about the white witch turning people into stone. Perhaps this was only a stone lion. And as soon as he thought of that, he noticed that the lion's back and the top of its head were covered with snow. Of course, it must be only a statue. No living animal would have let itself get covered with snow. Then, very slowly and with his heart beating as if it would burst, Edmund ventured to go up to the lion. Even now, he hardly dared to touch it. But at last, he put out his hand very quickly and did. It was cold stone. He had been frightened of a mere statue. So at last, Edmund realized that the lion he was so scared of was actually made of stone. He suddenly remembered what everyone had said earlier, that the white witch turned people into stone. And now that he had stood there for quite some time and watched the lion, he realized that that is probably what actually happened. The white witch must have turned the lion to stone. So this lion was stone and he had been terrified of a statue. As soon as he thought of it, he noticed that the lion's back and top of its head were covered with snow. And that just helped him to confirm what he was thinking. The lion was a statue, because no living animal would have let itself get covered with snow like that. It would have been freezing. It would have run away into shelter. So then, very slowly, with his heart beating really fast, Edmund decided to go closer to the lion. Now that he had realized that it was only a stone lion, not a real lion, and would not hurt him in any way, he decided to go close. Even now, he hardly dared to touch it, but slowly he did get his courage and he touched it very quickly and saw that it was really cold and it was stone. Then he realized that he had been frightened of a statue. What a shame. The relief which Edmund felt was so great that in spite of the cold, he suddenly got warm all over, right down to his toes. And at the same time, there came into his head what seemed a perfectly lovely idea. Probably, he thought, this is the great lion Aslan that they were all talking about. She's caught him already and turned him into stone. So that's the end of all their fine ideas about him. Pooh, who's afraid of Aslan? So now that Edmund realized that this was a stone lion, he was so relieved that he suddenly felt warm again. And at the same time, he had an idea. He thought that this was probably the great lion Aslan that everyone had been talking about, and the white witch had probably already caught him and turned him into stone. And that was the end of poor lion Aslan. And he stood there, gloating over the stone lion. And presently, he did something very silly and childish. He took a stump of lead pencil out of his pocket and scribbled a mustache on the lion's upper lip and then a pair of spectacles on its eyes. Then he said, "Yeah, silly old Aslan. How do you like being a stone? You thought yourself mighty fine, didn't you?" But in spite of the scribbles on it, the face of the great stone beast still looked so terrible and sad and noble, staring up into the moonlight, that Edmund didn't really get any fun out of jeering at it. He turned away and began to cross the courtyard. So, like all little mischievous children who get these crazy ideas from time to time, Edmund also got one of his own. What did he decide to do? Now that he had got over his fear of the lion, he decided to do something stupid. So he took a pencil out of his pocket and he made a little mustache on the lion's upper lip. And then he made a pair of spectacles on the lion's eyes. And then he began to tease the lion and say, "Yeah, silly old Aslan, how do you like being stoned? You thought yourself mighty fine, didn't you?" But the lion, in spite of having all those things scribbled on its face, still looked terrible and sad and noble as it stared into the moonlight. And Edmund really did not enjoy himself. So he turned away and he began to cross the courtyard. As he got into the middle of it, the middle of the courtyard, he saw that there were dozens of statues all about, standing here and there, rather as the pieces stand on a chessboard when it is halfway through the game. There were stone satyrs and stone wolves and bears and foxes and cat, a mountain of stones. There was the great shape of a centaur and a winged horse and a long-legged creature that Edmund took to be a dragon. They all looked so strange, standing there perfectly lifelike and also perfectly still in the bright cold moonlight, that it was an eerie work crossing the courtyard. He now saw that there was a dim light showing from a doorway on the far side of the courtyard. He went towards it. There was a flight of stone steps going up to an open door. Edmund went up to them. Across the threshold lay a great wolf. So as he got to the middle of the courtyard, he noticed that the lion was not the only creature that was made of stone there. There were so many others. There were stone satyrs and wolves and bears and foxes and centaur and horse and dragon and so many animals. And they were all standing there perfectly still, made of stone, and yet they looked lifelike. They looked scary. They looked weird in the moonlight. And Edmund realized that they might have once been alive. He now saw that there was a dim light showing from a doorway on the far side of the courtyard. So he decided to go there. When he reached there, there was a flight of stone steps going to an open door. So he went up the steps. And now when he reached the threshold is the part of a room which is near the doorway, at the entrance of a room. So across the threshold, what did he see? He saw a great wolf. "It's all right, he kept saying to himself. "It's only a stone wolf." Now he had seen so many stone creatures that he presumes the wolf is also made of stone. "It can't hurt me." And he raised his leg to step over it. Instantly, the huge creature rose with its hair, with all the hair bristling along its back, opened a great red mouth and said in a growling voice, "Who's there? Who's there? Stand still, stranger, and tell me who you are." Edmund must have been really scared. He must have been terrified. He expected this wolf to be stone, but it wasn't. And as he tried to step over the wolf rose and rose in anger. You know, when animals get angry, the hair on their back, the back where the neck is, that part, it rises, bristling, standing straight. So the hair of this wolf also rose. Then he opened his mouth and he growled. It was a horrible, deep growl. And he said to Edmund, "Tell me who you are and stand still, don't move." "If you please, sir," said Edmund, trembling so that he could hardly speak. "My name is Edmund, and I am the son of Adam that Her Majesty met in the woods the other day, and I have come to bring her the news that my brother and sisters are now in Narnia, quite close, in the beaver's house. She wanted to see them." So Edmund tells the wolf, "Well, I'm Edmund. I'm the son of Adam. Her Majesty met me in the woods the other day and she wanted me to bring my brother and sisters to Narnia. So I've come to say that I have brought them to Narnia. They're not here with me right now, but they are very close by. They're in the beaver's house." "I will tell Her Majesty," said the wolf. "Meanwhile, stand still on the threshold as you value your life." Then it vanished into the house. Edmund stood and waited, his fingers aching with cold and his heart pounding in his chest. And presently the grey wolf, Morgrim, the chief of the witches' secret police, came bounding back and said, come in, fortunate favorite of the queen, or else not so fortunate." And Edmund went in, taking great care not to tread on the wolf's paws. So Edmund stood still and he waited for the wolf to go and tell the White Witch that Edmund had arrived. As he waited there, his fingers were aching with cold and his heart was pounding in his chest. He was so terrified. Now, who was this grey wolf? He was Morgrim, the chief of the witches' secret police. Imagine that. And he came bounding back. You know how a wolf bounds. He came back and he said, come in, fortunate favorite of the queen. It's very fortunate you're her favorite. And then he adds, or maybe not so fortunate. Interesting. So Edmund went in, but he had to cross over the wolf, and he was very careful not to stand on the wolf's paws. If you stand on an animal's paws, you know what happens. Now, this was the wolf, the chief of the witches' secret police. So Edmund dare not stand on its paw. He found himself in a long, gloomy hall with many pillars, full as the courtyard had been of statues. The one nearest the door was a little fawn, a deer, with a very sad expression on its face, and Edmund couldn't help wondering if this might be Lucy's friend. The only light came from a single lamp, and close beside this sat the White Witch. "I've come, Your Majesty," said Edmund, rushing eagerly forward. Now, if you remember in the beginning of the story, we heard that Edmund really liked the White Witch. He believed she was a good person and she was fond of him and she treated him well and gave him Turkish delight. Now he found himself in a long, sad, dark hall, which was filled with pillars and of statues. Statues of animals, like the courtyard had been, and they all were made of stone. Of course, there was one particular statue that held Edmund's interest. There was a little fawn with a sad expression on its face, and Edmund wondered if that might be Lucy's friend. There was only a small light that came from a single lamp. And who sat near that lamp? The White Witch. Edmund rushed eagerly forward to her because he liked her and thought that she liked him, and said, "I've come." "How dare you come alone?" said the witch in a terrible voice. Unfortunately, my voice can't be so terrible. I can't make it so terrible. "Did I not tell you to bring the others with you?" "Please, Your Majesty," said Edmund, "I've done the best I can. I've brought them quite close. They're in the little house on top of the dam just up the river with Mr. and Mrs. Beaver." A slow, cruel smile came over the witch's face. "Is this all your news?" she asked. So when the witch saw Edmund alone, she was very angry, very upset. She said in a terrible voice to him, "How dare you come alone? I told you to bring your siblings with you." So Edmund replies and says, "I'm sorry, Your Majesty, but I have come alone only till here. I have brought my siblings very close. In fact, they are in Mr. and Mrs. Beaver's house." And when she heard that, she relaxed, she got happier, and a cruel smile lit her face, and she said, "Is that your news?" "No, Your Majesty," said Edmund, and proceeded to tell her all he had heard before leaving the beaver's house. Stupid little Edmund. What did he do? He told the White Witch all that he had heard at the beaver's house during their conversation there. He let out all the secrets. "What? Aslan," cried the queen. "Aslan, is this true? If I find you have lied to me—" "Please, I'm only repeating what they said," stammered Edmund. So the witch cannot believe what she has heard. And Edmund says, "I don't know if it's true," because the witch says, "If I find out you lied to me, see what I do to you." And Edmund says, "Well, I'm not lying to you, but I don't know if it's true because I'm only repeating what I heard." Right? But the queen, who was no longer attending to him, clapped her hands. Instantly, the same dwarf whom Edmund had seen with her before appeared. "Make ready our sledge," ordered the witch, "and use the harness without bells." Now, isn't that amazing? Interesting? I'm sure you want to know what happened next. For that, you'll have to read the rest of the story from the book. So Edmund says, "I'm repeating what they said," and the queen now no longer listened to what he was saying. She was more interested in something else. What was she interested in? She called the dwarf immediately and she said, "Hurry up, get our sledge ready and use the harness without bells." Harness is a strip of leather that's put on an animal's body so that it can be controlled by a man, and usually they put bells on it. But this time she said, "Don't put bells." Why? Because she did not want anyone to know she was coming. That makes it even scarier, isn't it? She wanted to go quietly. Now, why on earth would she want to do that? Think. Okay, so let's go through the questions that I have for you. Is this true or false? Let's see if you can tell me. Edmund loved Turkish delight. Yes, it's true. I hope you knew that. Aslan was a real lion? No. He was made of stone. The wolf was made of stone. What do you think? No. Do you remember when Edmund tried to go over the wolf rose. The White Witch was angry that Edmund had come alone. Or was she happy? True, she was very angry. Why? Because she was expecting him to bring her siblings along, and he hadn't. And the White Witch asked the wolf to get her sledge ready. True? No, it's false, because she asked the dwarf to get her sledge ready, not the wolf. So you have to know the facts very well if you want to get good marks in literature. Now, if you feel that you don't know the story that well, you know what you need to do? You need to open the textbook and read the story over and over again. Don't stop at once or twice or thrice. Read it, maybe even 10 times, maybe even 20 times. Read it over and over. In fact, you could have a practice that you keep your textbook by the side of your bed, and before you sleep every night, read the lesson. Then read it again the next night. And I am telling you, you will find something in the story that you have not discovered before. Each time you read it, you will find something new, something that you did not read before, never knew before. So read it over and over again, and your marks will improve. Each time you read it, you can expect to get better marks. The more you read it, the better marks you get. So if you want Very good marks. Imagine how many times you will need to read it. Now, I can't tell you a definite number. I can't tell you how many times you would actually need to read the story because everyone's different. I might need to read the story about 5 times to know it very well. You might need to read the story 20 times to know it very well. Someone else might need to read the story only twice to know it very well. So it depends on you. You read it until there comes a time when you realize you're not learning anything more from it. You know all the facts, you have not left anything out, and you're not discovering anything new. Then you know you have read it and understood it, and you know all there is to know. Until we meet again, do take care of yourselves, and I hope you enjoyed this lesson as much as I enjoyed it. I love reading stories. So I'll say bye for now, and we'll meet very soon with the next literature lesson. Bye.